That, of course, is the great Paul McCartney.
Welcome to Expert Minutes. I'm John Hambone McGuire.
This conversation
Sweet, juicy. Where did that word come from?
I don't know.
Bet you never thought you'd hear that on the radio.
Hello, I'm Graham Mack from Podcast Radio. I present the Pod 20, which is a chart countdown show of the top 20 podcasts in the world. The show goes out on Fridays at 5 p.m. On DAB in London, Manchester and Glasgow, and of course online at thepodcastradio.co.uk. And it's also a podcast itself. And the great thing about doing the chart show is I get to chat to some of the podcasters who make the chart. And it's a pleasure to welcome Lewis James from Melodies of Life. How are you, Lewis?
I'm doing very well, Graham. How are you?
Great. I should say where we met, actually, shouldn't I? We were at how long ago was it now? Was it 3 weeks ago, the podcast show in London, or only 2 weeks ago? Wasn't long ago.
About a week and a half, 2 weeks ago.
Oh, it wasn't even that long ago, yeah. And I was on the Podcast Radio stand briefly, basically just killing time. Jerry was doing all the heavy lifting and the promotion of a Podcast Radio. Why did you decide to go to the podcast show?
I heard an advert of it while listening to another podcast who ended up plugging the podcast show as well because they were doing a panel over there as well.
All right. Who was that? Can you say?
It was Abroad in Japan from Stack.
Oh, right. Right. Okay.
And there was a period when I was just walking down the tube going towards a rehearsal I was going to attend. And I thought to myself, I could probably do more than just visiting Chris Broad. Because I've just started the podcast and I knew there was potential in getting more marketing because I actually have an episode backlog now compared to like 2-3 episodes, about 4 or 5 now. Yeah. And I've just got some business cards printed and I'm just thought to myself, you know what? I'm just going to bite the bullet. I'm going to get on with it. It's just a short train ride away from where I live. So sod it.
And where do you live?
I live just outside Teddington.
Ah, where Thames TV used to be, Teddington Lock.
Yeah. I've just down the road from there, actually.
Right. Okay. So that's where you are right now. And what did you make of the podcast show in London? It's a big attendance. I was surprised how many people were there.
Yeah, it was amazing. I remember just walking into the exhibition hall, and I just thought to myself, just the potential in this room alone, you can just feel the electricity in the air.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at my my pass with the name of my podcast. And it was like Lewis James, My Melodies of Life, and I'm like, okay, this is real. I've never experienced anything like this before. Yeah, very proud.
Which sessions did you get to? Many of the sessions? Any of those you particularly liked?
I spoke apart from the Abroad in Japan panel that I went to. I focused on a lot of the marketing stuff and all of the promotional stuff because I already have a roadmap of the content itself laid down.
Yeah.
I already know what I'm going to be doing in the future. It's just a case of getting headphones in ears and getting
Yeah. But you've got Acast behind you, so that must help.
Yeah, I heard an advert during one of the ad breaks for a podcast where they were promoting their distribution, and there was a free tier that I can use just to get the river flowing, so to speak.
Yeah.
So nothing too complex like sponsorships or automatic distributions or things like that. They'll give me an RSS feed, and I can just use that to put into other platforms.
And they don't charge for that.
No, there is one tier that is free, yes, but
wow. And you can so if someone who's watching this who is a podcaster, just having that Acast name on your podcast, it makes it quite impressive, doesn't it? It sets you apart.
It is, yeah. I'm not going to be part of the creative network just yet because I think there's a certain amount of downloads per week that I have to reach before I get recognized as part of that network. But it's a good stepping stone to start with.
Yeah. And you were already doing that before the podcast show then?
About the
With
week
Acast?
before. Yeah, the week before. Because
And what did you learn about marketing then from the show?
I learned quite a lot about promo swaps.
What's that?
Where you basically go to a podcaster or a team and you basically contact them just to say, I'm a fan of what you do. I really like you guys. I've just started a podcast. If you're okay with promoting me there, I'm more than happy to promote you back as well, just so we can exchange fans and build a mutual following from there.
That's where radio and podcasting differ. You know, I spent years in radio, and radio stations hated each other. You know, they would not want anybody. People would get, program directors would lose sleep if another radio station's logo appeared in a news bulletin, which is why they put the logos on the mic sticks when they're interviewing people at thing, because they don't necessarily do it to promote their own station. They do it to piss off their rivals. So, but podcasting has a different vibe, doesn't it? It's like everybody's in it together and they want to help each other. You get that real feeling that, it's us against the world. It's I always describe it as the punk version of podcasting.
I agree.
Yeah, it's good.
Being a music man myself, knowing the origins of punk and considering the Sex Pistols biopic just came out on Disney Plus. Yeah,
have you seen it?
Agree.
Have you seen that yet?
I haven't personally, but
I've just watched the sixth one last night. It's brilliant. I know Johnny Rotten hates it, or he's annoyed that he wasn't involved in it, but it's really, really well done. Everybody's brilliant in it. So if you get the chance, it's on Disney Plus. But no, it's not. Is it on Disney? Yeah, it's on Disney. Yeah. But it is really good. If you can watch that you will connect with the spirit of podcasting through it, I'm sure. When you see what happened, with the Malcolm McLaren thing and just the way because up until that stage, to be a professional musician, you really had to. Well, first of all, you had to be able to play really well. Yeah. Well, they just blew all that up and said, look, anybody can do this. And we're just, a load of oiks. And podcasting is the same way. Radio has been snooty for years and saying, oh, no, if you want to do radio, you've got to go to broadcasting school or journalism school and you've got to have this kit and whatever. And podcasting is saying, no, you don't. But, on the other hand, though, you are a musician. You're a composer.
I am, yes.
Tell us how you got into that.
Long story, but I'm sure we've got time.
I'm sure. Well, we've got as long as you like. That's the other great thing about podcasting. We're not chasing the clock.
No, exactly. It started off when I was about 6 years old, primary school. I remember a guest speaker coming in from an assembly, displaying all these different instruments, because it was around that time in a childhood's life where you would consider, if you want to learn an instrument, now's a good time. Because you're at that
the younger
stage
the better.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And I've always been fascinated by music as a kid. Like whenever my father would put on a cassette tape in the car, yes, I'm that old, just play some classic pop tune in the background, I would just get mesmerized by all the different components. I listened to the bass line, I listened to the harmony, and I'm just thinking about, how does this all work? It's all so magical. And then I remember having big problems holding my breath whenever I go swimming. So I always have these big paddy life jackets on, the ones. And I always said to myself, if I'm going to learn an instrument, I am not going to learn one that requires breathing, because no way I'm going to do that. I'm already rubbish. So I picked the trombone.
Okay.
And I remember 2 weeks into it, because the reason I picked the trombone is because I love the slide.
Yeah.
Because I knew everything else was quite stiff regarding notes, because always one
you
note
can't bend them.
But...
I think guitar you can bend notes, and harmonica, if you play cross harp, you can bend notes, but there aren't that many instruments where you can bend notes.
Yeah. And then about 3 weeks into learning it, I recognized the mouthpiece. I'm like, I just broke my own promise. But
was there a particular trombonist that inspired you? Glenn Miller was a trombonist, wasn't he?
No, that actually came up quite later when I thought to myself, if I'm going to get better, might as well do some research into trombonists and how they develop.
Yeah.
And it it got me to a really fascinating story. Who's the musician's name? Forget. Completely forget. But I think she was deaf, and the only way she could recognize what note she was playing and how loud he was playing it was through vibrations through the mouthpiece and from the floor, along with the
Right.
rest of the orchestra. And she was one of the best in the world.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Wow. So it just shows you there's really nothing can hold you back if you really want to do it. Or if it's
yeah,
there, if
exactly.
it's in you.
Mm.
So, well, let's move on to the podcast then. So you've got this background in music. You're a musician,
Mm.
you're a composer. So you were always interested in how it came together. So I'm guessing arrangements is part of what you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you decide to do a podcast, and the podcast, My Melodies of Life, it's a very specific niche in the music business. It is the music from video games.
Yes.
Why did you decide? Well, first of all, what attracted you to the soundtracks of video games?
Slightly older now. I'm probably about 9 years old now. I remember visiting my aunt, and she had a PlayStation. I didn't get one myself for another couple of years. But whenever someone had a console at their house, whenever I visit them, I've always get attracted to that. Because I see the controller, I see the buttons, and I'm just like, oh, I can actually control what's going on the screen. In a way, it kind of hypnotized me to actually get to live the world that's on the screen. Apart from instead of when you could see a TV show or a film, you just had to experience what's on there, and you can't really influence it. And bear in mind, it was in 1999, so the graphics weren't really that great at the time. But as a 9-year-old, I did not care. But I remember playing a game called Pandemonium, and it was so colorful, so exotic that the characters themselves were so in your face, you can't help but pay attention to it, and the music that accompanied it was fantastic. And as I got older, I saw Final Fantasy VIII for the first time. That blew me out of the water. Because you hear orchestra. As soon as you start playing, you hear this orchestra, and you see this shot of a beach with waves coming through, with a choir singing in time with the waves.
Mm-hmm.
And then the camera just zooms into the horizon, and you hear the dun 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 dun, and I was like, oh my god.
Because for anybody who doesn't know, the music in video games these days is every bit as big and as well produced as movie soundtracks, isn't it?
Yeah, now it is. Yeah. And this was at that breaking point where movie soundtracks and game soundtracks start to merge.
Yeah.
Because you can hear full-on orchestras playing main themes, and even though as you go into the game, there may be some of that digital influence with like
Sampling.
synthesizers and stuff like that, with sampling and MIDI instruments and stuff like that. By the time you get to the climax or the ending, the orchestra starts to come in again, and then you feel this respite that you tend to get with a satisfactory ending.
Yeah.
And it just completely blew me away, and I kind of stuck with that without realizing that it was the music that fascinated me in the first place until a lot later, when I started to figure out what I wanted to do in the future during my teenage years. I was figuring out my GCSEs and my A levels when I was done with them, and I just thought to myself, hold on, maybe I could be a really good composer. Because I just naturally ended up doing my own thing when I was asked to create something as part of an exercise in a music class, and I just ended up completely blowing up the competition with the rest of the classroom. And I just had this epiphany in my head thinking, why didn't I realize this sooner? I should really focus on this.
So where did you study music then? When once you'd finished your school and stuff, did you must have studied music then? Did you?
I studied. I did my GCSE and my A levels in music at Rivlington Business and Enterprise School, which is a school just outside Somerset, because I
Okay.
grew up in Bath at the time,
Right, I
and
see.
I ended up doing my undergraduate at music technology at the University of South Wales, which
I
had a
see.
lot of music theory built into the course as well. So not only did I get to learn more of the technological side, which I didn't get to do that much at the school,
Yeah,
I always got to catch up on the theory side as well.
yeah,
And it's where I got to learn about digital audio workstations, more about MIDI instruments, and recording studios as well. They had their built-in studios as well, where you get to record and mix stuff as well. And it was through that I really started to mature, not just as a musician or as a composer, but as a person as well. I really got
really.
to figure out my strengths and my weaknesses.
Because these days,
Again,
because years ago, a composer, it was all about manuscripts and charts, as musicians would call them. It was about, writing it all down, everything. But these days, you have to be able to record and mix and everything. You have to do it from the beginning to the end, don't you? You have
yeah.
to be a composer. You have to know how to record it and how to edit it and arrange it that way, and be very familiar with things like Pro Tools and other multi-track software. Yeah.
Yeah, because I use Logic Pro, and
Right.
the magic with that and the digital instruments with that is you're halfway there already. You just have
Right.
to put the notes in. The instruments sound realistic already, especially when you get some really good plugins like the ones from East West and the Composer Cloud software, which I highly recommend.
Yeah.
Um, the It sounds like you've already recorded some of the best orchestras in the world, and all you have to do is just uh do the mixing, the mastering, and you're pretty much there already.
So you say when you were in South Wales, you were learning all this, you found out more about yourself. Just
Mm.
explain how that happened. What did you find out, and how did learning about music and recording it and composing it do that?
Yeah, I remember being tested on how a studio and the desk worked,
Yeah.
and it it was around the time when automatic faders tend to come in, and the
On
manual ones
digital
weren't really
desks.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, the manual ones weren't really out of circulation yet, and you had to do like fiddling with wires, trying to get the right plugin sorted out, and
Patching.
then
Yeah.
to try to get the fader at just the right bit, just so everything sounds all right. And it just ended up getting way too complicated for me because I can only process so much information.
Yeah.
But on the creative side of things, with actually making the music itself, putting the notes down and putting the harmonies together, I excelled in that.
Right.
So I just said to myself, if I'm ever gonna do something that requires professional studio work and production, I can just hire someone to do it, or get a favor from a friend and just return it sometime later.
So you can specialize in the composing
Yeah,
and
precisely.
arranging. Yeah.
Mm.
So then how did you make the leap, or where did the epiphany happen when you went, I should do a podcast about the music in video games?
Mm. A part of it was because a lot of my friends in my social circle aren't that fascinated in video game music as much as I do, yet they still attend the same concerts as me.
Right.
But apparently my fascination was a completely different level.
Yeah.
And a couple of friends of mine who did a podcast on the Final Fantasy video game franchise decided to take a hiatus because their YouTube channel decided to grow,
Yeah.
which focuses on the same thing but under a different light. And they started a family, and things got way out of control for them. They had to sacrifice something. And I thought to myself, there's a void that can be filled here.
Yeah.
And there are quite a few people that are potentially missing out on something with them gone. So I thought to myself,
so they were
I may as well
talking
start
about
there,
video game music in their one. Is that right? In their podcast?
not exactly. They were talking about the Final Fantasy series specifically, not the music.
Not
but
the music, right?
Yeah, they would talk about the music if the matter happens to be topical at that time, or if a concert just happened in the area.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking to myself, well, the history is already there. It's well documented about the franchise in general, but no one really talked about the music specifically and broke it down in regards to what makes it so special.
Yeah.
Why is it so memorable after 35 years?
Yeah. I think the thing with your podcast, it's what I like about great podcasts that go for a niche, is that as long as the host manages to connect with the enthusiasm they have for the subject, you find yourself being barreled along with it. I mean, I don't even play video games, but listening to your podcast, it's like, yeah, that's a really good point. It's because your enthusiasm really does come through, and you bring the listener along with you, which was an argument I had when I was in radio. I was constantly in trouble with program directors because I might talk about some really offbeat thing that I was like, I was really into blues music, and I might, find out a great story about Stevie Ray Vaughan or a blues artist I really like, and I might mention it, and the program director go, oh, no one's into that music, mate, there's no point talking about it. And I go, but can't you see how enthusiastic I was about it? I think I may have brought a few people along with me. Oh, mate, no, there's not. But they're wrong, and you're right. It is that if you are really into something and it's your thing and you can be enthusiastic about it, and that enthusiasm's infectious. It really is, and you do a really great job of it. So well done. It's a great podcast. Why is it
Thank
called
you very much.
Why is it called Memories of Life? Sorry,
So why
it's not called that, is it? Why is it actually called My Melodies of Life? Because you could have called it Melodies of Life. You could have called it, but My Melodies of Life. Where's the title come from?
Basically, Melodies of Life was taken.
Was it? Who's running that? What is Melodies of Life about?
There's a story to that.
Okay.
Final Fantasy 9.
Yes.
Its main theme is called Melodies of Life.
Oh,
And
I see.
I was trying to come up with a name, and I always loved puns. I've always loved Easter eggs, like the attention to detail or tributes to a particular topic.
Yeah.
Because through doing that, I knew that you can tell that the people behind it love what they do, and they weren't going to cut any corners in their respective field.
Yeah.
So and I thought to myself, okay, how do I get the point across that it's about music? It's my discussion and analysis.
Yes.
And I just thought to myself, and it influenced my personal life as well. So the emphasis is on life.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, I was listening to Melodies of Life, the song, while I was thinking about it, and I just thought, hold on, Melodies, Life, Melodies of Life. My Melodies of Life. And I remember Googling all the copyright websites to see if that phrase was a registered trademark.
Yeah.
I couldn't find it.
Right.
So I just thought, it's fair game.
Right. Okay. Have you trademarked it since, just in case somebody wants to steal it?
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Maybe I shouldn't have let that out the bag in case someone wants to nick it. Yeah. And you play a lot of music from video games when you talk about them. How do you get around the licensing issues? Because I know for a lot of podcasters stay away from music because they don't want to get caught out with a licensing issue for playing music that isn't licensed to be played in a podcast. How do you get around that?
I've did some research into how fair use works.
Fair
And
use, yes.
yeah, and basically, if you can play a certain amount, like
Yeah,
a short sample, before it gets a bit too revealing, then you're pretty much fine.
I see.
And
See,
and it's very dependent on the company as well. A lot of people tend to be, it's fine. We know it's transformative. We know you're not doing basically ripping us off.
yeah.
So by all means, have at it. But I have seen instances on companies, especially film companies or music companies on YouTube, that will just see a second of footage or hear a second of sound and just like, no, that's ours. We want the money from the
Oh,
entire project.
with YouTube, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I got into trouble. I was in a blues band, and we did a version of Tommy Tucker's High Heel Sneakers. And I'm not
Very
even
nice.
going to, I'm not even going to sing you a little bit of it, because Tommy Tucker's grandson, it was a gig the band played at Mr. Kip's in Poole, which is a great venue. It's not a venue anymore. And we videoed the gig, and I put some of the tracks on YouTube because we'd recorded the audio through the mixing desk, so it sounded good, and so we put it on there. And one of the songs we did was our version of Tommy Tucker's High Heel Sneakers. And Tommy Tucker's grandson, I think it was his grandson. I don't want to say. Well, it definitely wasn't his son. I think it was his grandson. And his grandson contacted me and said, "You owe me some money." And I said, "How's that then?" And he said, "Well, that's my grandfather's song, and the family owns the rights to it."
Mm.
And I said, "Yeah, but we're a blues band, so pretty much every song we do is like all blues bands do, Hoochie Coochie Man, and Talk to Your Daughter, and all these like things, and there's probably lots of bands do it." And he said, "Well, you owe me some." I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I will give you 100% of the money that video on YouTube makes." Because it only had something like a couple of thousand downloads. YouTube hadn't put any advertising on it because it didn't have enough downloads. But I thought, if it does, you can have everything it makes, right? And if it doesn't, I didn't think it was going to get any more hits. Who were the Graham Mack Blues Band? And I said, you can have 100% of what it makes. And he went, "No, you owe me some money. We need to work out a fee that you need to pay me to keep that video on YouTube." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to pay you any. This thing's not going to make any money. So I'm not going to pay you to have it on there unless I can make some money from it. What are you talking about?" So in the end, I said, "Look, I'll take it down." So I took it down. So then about 6 weeks later, I thought, that was one of the best songs we did on that gig. I'm going to put it back up again. So I put it back up again, and I got a copyright strike from YouTube. Because you're only allowed 3 and then you're banned. And it wasn't a copyright warning or anything. It was a copyright strike because he wrote to or emailed YouTube and made them take it down. Now, I personally think he was a bit cheeky because he didn't write the song. He had about as much connection to it as I did. For all I know, he's never performed the song. At least I was performing the song and keeping the song alive, and I've quite happily put a credit on there saying it was written by Tommy Tucker. We didn't pretend it was my song. And usually,
that's all you can do.
Yeah, and but anyway, yeah. So yeah, you do have to be, particularly with YouTube, you have to be very careful with copyright.
Yeah. So I did some research going back to your previous question. I did some research on the publishers of Final Fantasy, Square Enix, because that was the franchise I was focusing on for this series. That's another reason why I called it My Melodies of Life, because I didn't want to generalize it to Final Fantasy alone.
Yes.
And there was a section about music, and they basically said, as long as you're not just playing it just for the sake of playing it in your streams or in your podcast or anything like that, it's fine, as long as you make it transformative, which is what I did.
And how do they define make it transformative?
Basically, add something to the content that's already there.
So if you're reviewing it, for instance, that's fair use.
Yeah.
I see.
So I do a 15-20 second preview, slowly start fading out, and then talk over the rest of it, or fade out if it's getting in the way. If like a melody's way too complicated and gets to the point where it's distracting, I would probably fade it out then. But if it's something very somber, very slow or waltzy, I'll probably just leave it there. And on top of talking about it, it makes pretty good ambience as well and really sets the mood.
Yeah, it does. You've got like you're a podcast with its own incidental music.
And I make my own music for the stingers and the jingles as well.
Right. So that stuff
I
at the
can't-
beginning there, when you set it all up on each podcast, that's your music.
That's my music, yeah. So
Yeah.
I can't have any copyright issues with that at all because it's mine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The only person you need permission from is you. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you talked about using Logic Pro. What do you use to make the podcast? What kit do you use? What software?
I use Logic Pro as well.
You do? Wow.
Yeah. Because a lot of the instruments that I need to make the podcast was already built in. And
Yeah.
I thought there really wasn't any point getting anything else. I tried using Audacity just for recording my my audio, my narration.
Yes.
And after an update, it just didn't recognize the microphone or the audio processing unit that I'm using.
Really?
Yeah, it just gave me an error message, and I had no idea what it was talking about. And I looked at some forums just to see if I could troubleshoot it. Couldn't find anything solid, so I just
Yeah.
thought to myself, okay, let's do everything on Logic, including the recording. I know a lot of die-hard audio fans will probably hear certain differences, but there's pretty much no difference in the basic audio quality. You can still hear what I'm saying. It's still as clear as what it was previously.
Yeah.
The only difference is it's slightly damper in the sound, but you can
Oh,
get away
people
with that
won't
easily
notice
with
that.
the mixing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I use I like Audacity. I was when I was in radio, I was always like a rebel because everybody in radio uses Adobe Audition. And I always used to use Audacity. And the reason was very simple, is because I have Apple computers at home and radio stations tend to have Windows computers. And I could, if I could use Audacity on both because it's free. You just download, but if I wanted, and I used to have Adobe Audition, but I used to pay for it. And then they changed it to monthly subscription. And I thought, well, to hell with you. I'm not going to pay monthly subscription just to get something I can get for free. And I'm not doing like you. I'm not doing multiple composing and stuff. And I think, I would give that as advice to anyone who works in radio is learn how to use Audacity. It's hard to learn at first if you're used to one of the other ones, but you get there in the end if you persist with it. It means that wherever you go, you can download it for free and you know how to use it. So if you go to a radio station that doesn't have it, you can download it and, it's just always there. But Logic Pro is a really expensive one, isn't it?
Oh yeah, you're talking a good £250 worth.
Yeah. Was that a one-off or is that do they? Oh, actually, that would work out cheaper than Adobe Audition because Adobe Audition needs a monthly fee. I forget what it is. I think
it
it's
was
like
a one-off.
$20.
It was a one-off because
Yeah,
as
I
soon
wouldn't
as
mind
I
it if it's a
got-
one-off because, like I say, I used to have Adobe Audition. What really annoyed me was when I used to use Windows computers. I had Adobe Audition, and I upgraded to the next Windows, whatever it is, the next,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't work on the new Windows. So I rang up Audacity and they said, oh yeah, you need to pay extra and get another disk to update it. And then I did that. And then I wanted to run it on my laptop. And then Microsoft said that they need, I can't remember what it was, but anyway, they wanted more money. I'm like, oh, to hell with you. And then I discovered Audacity and then everything was free. Maybe I'm just cheap. I don't know.
But let's be fair, in this day and age, aren't we all?
Yeah, and we're going to have to get that way, the way the economy's going. Yeah. Talking of economy then, does My Memories of Life make any money?
My Melodies of Life does not make any money. No, it's only fresh out the oven, pretty much. It's about 5 episodes, like 6 months into it. And when I initially did a trial run on SoundCloud before I properly did distribution a few weeks ago, there was on average about 20, 30 plays on it.
Okay.
And I remember I was going to the Acast booth, going back to what we were talking about, the podcast show. And they said they only just implemented advertising options in the free tier. like as
Okay.
I was talking to them. I haven't had a
Yeah.
chance to look at that yet, but if that's there, then by all means, I won't say no to an extra £3. But
But I think at
uh,
this stage of the product's lifespan, I think you need to be building awareness, don't you, really, and building an
yeah,
audience and a tribe, and then you
mm,
can take that tribe to either an
exactly.
advertising model or perhaps even Patreon or anything like that.
Mm,
I think you're not at
yeah.
that stage yet because everything has a
No,
life
no, no.
cycle, doesn't it? Yeah.
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 I wanted to focus on viewership, marketing, and promotion first, and
Yes.
try and get that base, try and get that ground layer going
Yeah.
before I could even think about anything financial with advertising, sponsorships, Patreon,
Yeah.
etc.
I think you'll just drive
Um,
yourself crazy if you're trying to.
yeah, I'd be thinking way too far ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And what podcasts inspire you?
Um, It's the thing. I don't really listen to other video game podcasts or music podcasts. I listen to one or two,
Yeah.
but it's just a case of I don't want to build my own competition. Of course, I listen to podcasts whenever I do a commute or when I do a trip.
And what
But
kind of
they're
stuff do you
completely.
listen to?
I listen to, as I said earlier, I'm born in Japan. I've always wanted to visit Japan. A lot of my favorite video games are from that country. I've always wanted to visit and just see the sights,
Interesting
have the
thing.
experiences.
Interesting thing about that I always
Mm.
find about Japan. Now I've been
Mm.
to Tokyo. I went to Tokyo as a stopover on the way to New Zealand once for about 3 days.
Okay.
It's a fascinating place.
Mm.
Fascinating. You'd love it. And the thing that always fascinates me about Japan and video games is there has been a discussion for probably the last 30 years, or as long as we've had violent video games, where
Mm.
a certain group of people suggest that people who are right into violent video games become more violent people.
I disagree.
Well, I disagree too, based on, and I'm not into video games, but still,
Yeah.
based on Japan, because the Japanese are into some of the most violent video games you can possibly get, and lots of Japanese people are into them, and Japan has a very, very low level of violent crime.
Yeah.
So how does that square up?
Yeah. I play my fair share of violent video games, but you don't see me
You don't strike me as a violent
losing my
person,
mind. No,
Lewis.
no, not at all. I hope not.
No. Okay. So we were talking about video. We were talking about podcasts that you listen to. So
Yeah.
there's the Japan one. What is that called?
Abroad in Japan.
Abroad in Japan. Okay.
Yeah.
And what else?
I also listen to something called Podiots, which is basically a conversational comedy podcast about 90s kids basically having conversations about how they themselves are just idiots and try to find the funniest things that they can talk about around the world. And like it's very, the humor's quite low. Like it's pretty much toilet humor and 90s humor like all the way through, but
Is
that's
it
what I'm
like
there for.
Jackass in audio? Is it a bit like that then?
I say it's a bit more tame than that, but
Okay.
you do get the odd spike of something completely outrageous, but I won't give too much away. I listened to Triple Jump, which is from some of the guys behind Podiots before they had their own YouTube channel called Vidiots, which is where Podiots' name came from because it's the
Right.
podcast of Vidiots.
Yeah.
But they had to shut the channel down because the viewership wasn't doing that great. But they got hired by some friends of theirs who they used to work with, who started their own company, and they're just
Right.
like, yeah, you can have your own channel, and it can be a sister channel to our one, so we can have a little mini network going. So I follow those instead, and they focus more on video games. So they
Right.
talk about the current affairs, the games that have been coming out, what they're currently playing, ones that are about to come out. We just had a really big conference from PlayStation earlier this week, so there's going to be lots to talk about there. What else do I listen to? I listened to a No Time to Die podcast as while I was gearing up for seeing that film because they were talking a lot of behind the scenes stuff, which I'm always fascinated
They
with,
didn't do a big
especially
spoiler,
with the
though, did
music.
they? Did they do a spoiler? Because there is a big
They-
spoiler in that movie.
They did at the last episode, but that wasn't released until about a few months after the film went out.
So you'd seen the film before you heard that spoiler?
Yes, I did.
Okay, right. So it didn't spoil it for you.
No. And for the main series, they didn't really delve into that. They did hint at that from time to time, but they didn't give that away until the very last episode when the hype started to die down.
Yeah.
And I listened to James Arnold Taylor, a very popular voice actor in cartoons and video games. He does a podcast called Talking to Myself.
Yeah.
Where he talks about his personal life, his professional life as well. And a lot of the time he tends to come up with his own characters and have them talk to each other as well as himself and just make it all up inside his head. And it just goes absolutely nuts. I've met him at a Comic-Con as well. He's an absolute gent, honestly.
Great.
If anyone gets the chance to see him at a convention, please go ahead. You can't meet a nicer voice actor than James Arnold Taylor. And that's pretty much it. If I do listen to any other podcasts, I can't. Oh, that's it. Wrestle Me. There was a podcast that again Stack did, where the co-owner hasn't seen a single WrestleMania, and a lot of his friends is his co-host is probably the biggest wrestling nerd in the podcast scene, and I have a similar relationship with my partner as well, where I'm a big wrestling fan and she's like in the casual side.
Okay.
So whenever something comes up and it kind of reminds me of that, I kind of explain what was happening, why I thought was funny, and what incident or situation it relates to, and she found it quite interesting. In such a way, we ended up watching a few wrestling shows together. There was actually a convention a few years ago in Manchester that we both went to, and we saw some live shows there. And she was completely blown away by just the energy that it brought out and the display of athleticism the wrestlers had. And we're pretty much thick as thieves in that regard. Yeah.
Now the podcasts I've listened to of yours, My Melodies of Life. I'm going to say it again, My Melodies of Life. I haven't heard. Now you may correct me here, but I haven't heard you do any interviews in them. Was that correct, or have I missed one?
No, I have not. No,
you've not. Okay, is there a reason for that? Because a lot of podcasts, including this one, rely on interviewing guests.
I tend mostly because I don't have the following to back up anyone that I would want to invite, and anyone who I want to invite at this moment are Japanese, and I don't know any Japanese. So
good point.
That's one good reason. And another reason is I want to be more of an essay rather than a traditional podcast.
Yeah.
So I remember during my GCSE, my A-levels, I've been asked to analyze a certain symphony or a certain pop song or something on that regard. And I remember doing quite well in breaking down and putting into words what the history of the song was, what emotion they were trying to portray, how a certain key relates to a specific emotion, that sort of thing. I won't go too much into musical jargon, otherwise I'll just bore everyone who's watching.
But people would probably understand that, say, a song in a minor key sounds more melancholy. So a song like, for instance, the people like Eleanor Rigby, is because it's in a minor key. Is that? Have I got that right?
Yeah, it's in a minor key. Yeah.
Yeah. So and it which gives it that kind of a different feel to something that's in a major key, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Even major keys can be the saddest thing in the world, just depending on the context.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I look at something that's supposed to be quite soft, but when I try to explain the scene in a podcast where you hear it from, and it's the most devastating thing you've ever seen in your life, that it actually affects how you play the game from that point on.
Right.
That's when you got a hit. That's when you found a song that has just stuck in your head for
Yeah.
decades. And I really try to figure out why is that. Take out the context, at least some of the context of what's on screen and what how you're playing the controller, and just focus on the notes, the harmonies, the melodies, the percussion, and figure out how they alone try to portray that message
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
that medium. And as I say in my intro, so many boundaries have been broken just from this medium, not just with the technology and with the transition from digital to real instruments, but emotional boundaries as well. And
Yeah.
I've never seen I've seen a few films that have gone through a similar transition, but I can think of more video games that can actually pull that off than I can do films, which is why I moved towards the video game music side compared to films.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a great podcast. It's a podcast that analyzes, is that fair to say, analyzes the music in video
Yes.
games? Yeah. It's Lewis James. It's called My Melodies of Life. It's on Acast. And check it out. I'm sure you'll like it and you'll enjoy Lewis's enthusiasm for the subject, and he'll bring you along with it because it might be something you've never thought about before, but it really is good. Lewis, it's been great to have you on. Thank you so much for being on Podcast Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care of yourself.